Thank you everyone for joining us. And in this webinar, we have two presenters. At the start, we will start with Dr. Tanya Noel. Dr. Noel is a science teaching and learning specialist in the Department of Integrative Biology at the University of Windsor. I will let her take the floor.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you everybody for coming out today. Let me just get my screen shared. All right, can you see my screen? All right, cool, thank you. All right, so today I'm going to talk to you about an assignment I've used many, many times. And it is something that I'm not going to describe as innovative, but it's incredibly helpful. And it's one of the ones that when I've shared it with other faculty, they seem to have used it and found it very helpful. So it's a microbiology in the news assignment. And as I see here, it's commonly used, but never quite the same. So the premise of this is very, very simple. And the idea is in the assignment or a set of assignments, students will review media stories that talk about microbiology, and they will share this. And recently I've had people also comment on the posts that have been created by other students. So this assignment is there. Like I said, it's not original. Lots of people do very similar types of things. I'm not going to take credit for this original idea, but it's one that I've used for, I don't want to think about how many years now, and it's evolved every year. I make some slight differences based on, in some cases, the course, in some cases, the technology is available, or other things that might be factors. Now, writing assignments are things that many of us have some trepidation about, especially with very large classes. And most of my classes go between somewhere from 100 to about 300 students. So this is not a minor thing. And it's often very stressful for students because they, especially if they're science students, may not have had a lot of experience writing. They may have had bad experiences. And that's something that can cause a lot of problems when they're trying to work on this. We also have issues where we have to watch about plagiarism, and of course, grading can be kind of a challenge. So some of the things about this particular assignment that are kind of useful and meet the needs that I've been trying to meet. It gives students some choice, which often in a very large class, we can't do very often. So there's not a lot of choice in terms of which midterm questions they have to answer, but they can actually choose the story that they want to write about. The fact that I give a little time limit, and depending on the last time I used this assignment, it might be a year or it might be 4 months ago. This means that people they may have previously submitted assignments from friends or family members who've taken the course, but they're not going to have the same exact article. And I used to do this assignment where they would just submit it to me, and I was the only person who saw it. But I found that once I asked them to start sharing their writing with their peers, we got much higher writing, higher quality writing. So there seems to be a bit of motivation there when something is not going to just face the professor, but their peers. I like to bring in some scaffolding, which I'll talk about in a moment. So some of the problems we see with academic dishonesty tend to be because students end up getting desperate, often being overwhelmed. They've left things till the last minute. They're not sure what to do. So if you get them doing some early steps, this often helps them to continue, and then you're less likely to have problems near the end. And I've got instructions I'm happy to share with you. I like to also give my rubric to students from the very beginning so that they know what will be looked at. And I like to give at least 2 tries or 2 different posts so that students can get feedback from their first attempt, because this usually helps them improve in the second attempt. And in some cases, what I'll do is I will tell them that if the second attempt, they get a higher grade on it, that can count for both. But this depends on the students and the year. Okay, so going back to just this basic statement here, there are a few things that I'd like to say you can customize. So you do not have to do exactly what I do, of course. So I've been doing this assignment through either the LMS blog, or last year I just went to the discussion forum, but that was mostly because it was easier to mark. You could actually have students post more publicly on a blog that is available, you know, to the whole world, if you're comfortable with that. But you would also have to teach them how to do it, and there might be some additional technical issues and maybe even concerns if they're doing this publicly facing. But obviously, lots of different ways you could get them to do this and share. I have typically done 2 different stories, 2 different posts. You could just do one. You don't get the chance for that feedback and improvement. So I like 2 for that. And if you have more time, maybe more marking help, you could even do more than 2. And the commenting, this again could be in a blog. You could have blog comments. So students have to read somebody else's post. Ideally, people are learning a little bit as they're doing this, and they're also interacting and having a discussion. So this is something that could be, like I said, blog comments or in the discussion forum, not form. This should be something that you have room for. And there could be a peer review or peer edit step along the way if you want it. And I've used this in basic microbiology. I've used this in medical microbiology. I imagine you could do almost anything for this. So this is another nice thing about this type of assignment is there's usually a wealth of stuff out there. And as long as your area isn't too narrow, students shouldn't have too much trouble finding stories on this. Oh, and I have students do this individually, but you could make this something where people work in pairs or even small groups, but I would make this a more extensive assignment than what I'm doing for just individuals. I mentioned that I like to use scaffolding. Admittedly, I don't do a ton of scaffolding for this particular assignment, but I do have due dates for just choosing that story. So they have to do that. They do it in a Google Sheet, although you could do this in other ways. And I try and be really clear about the deadlines. These are ones that I used last term for my medical micro. And I also give frequent reminders about those due dates. So you know, there's a lot of stuff going on in our students' lives, and I don't want people falling behind. So the instructions that I use and the rubric that I've used most recently are available. So hopefully Maria can put this in the chat for you guys. This is just a Google Doc that you can take a look at. Feel free to use whatever you like. And my guess is you'll probably want to make some editing and really customize this to your own course if you want to use it. And I have a few other suggestions if anybody's interested in using this. I would say take a look at the rubric and my marking scheme. You may find that you want to do something quite different. So my rubrics change depending on whether it's a second-year course or a third-year course. I imagine you'll have a bunch of differences as well. And hopefully some of you will have marking help. You might have TAs. It's often a really good idea to work with them before you finalize that rubric. Make sure that it makes sense to them. And often they have got really good suggestions that you can incorporate. And people, again, are often really worried about academic integrity, especially with writing. I like to take some time to talk about this with students. In many cases, they don't get a lot of details about what academic integrity really is, why we care about citing things, why paraphrasing is important, and giving them a chance to actually, work through this is something that is, I think, worthwhile time taken. And again, many of them haven't had much experience writing. If there are resources that you can give them on scientific writing, that might be really helpful. And once you've done this assignment, I suggest that you ask some of your students if you can use their papers or their posts to share with other students in the future, because that's often really, really useful when people first approach the assignment and they're not sure what it should look like. And with that in mind, I've been really happy with the quality of the work that I've been seeing in my students' submissions for this. So Tiffany gave me permission to share this, and she wrote a couple of really good posts. And I was also really impressed by the engagement that she had with a couple of peers. There were 2 people who commented on her story. Each of them cited a scientific article in their discussion as they tried to answer the question she'd posed in this. So I'd been concerned it would just be friends commenting on each other's posts, and that probably did happen. But for the most part, there were some really good discussions, sometimes going beyond the minimum that I'd asked them for. So this is something, again, I don't think it's innovative. I don't think it's especially original, but it can be a very useful little assignment if you want to bring in some writing and interaction into your class. And I've had pretty good feedback from students. So, and I'm happy to talk about anything if you've got any questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I definitely think this is an innovative way to get students to write. So I really commend you on that. I do want to say that to all our attendees, this committee wouldn't be possible without Tanya. So thank you, Tanya. I really thank you for starting this. So just to talk about how we're going to structure the questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask your question. If there's a list of people, if you just raise your blue hand, I will see who has a question and I can call upon you. Alternatively, you're welcome to also put your question in the chat. I am better at looking at the chat now that I'm not presenting. But while we wait for questions, I had a question about the rubric. You said that it's important to discuss this with the markers. Have you ever discussed it with the students themselves? And is that a good idea or not?
I think it can be a good idea, and I've done so, typically with smaller groups. So if I've got a class of 100 or 200, it gets a bit overwhelming to have that discussion, I will admit. I'm not sure that's a good reason not to have it. But when I've taught in the summer or for my small upper year course, that's actually a really nice activity you can get students involved with. And again, anything where you can give them some choice seems to make a huge difference in their motivation, and they sort of take ownership of it. So I'm glad you brought that up, because if you can do it, that is very cool. Okay, so there's a question in the chat. I don't pre-assign the topic. So what I do is I let them choose whatever newspaper article or whatever, online article. I've got a Google Sheet that they sign up for, and I ask for information that has to be there. And they're expected to search and make sure that nobody else had the same article. So I usually am checking this every day or so. I sometimes save copies in case there's a problem. I haven't had any problems yet. Occasionally we do get people choosing the same story. When that happens, usually we catch it quickly enough when we just email the second person and say, hey, this is something where, that article's been taken. You can choose something similar in terms of topic, but just not the same story. So that's worked out well. Students who completely missed the boat. Not yet, although writing skills really vary a lot in the course. So one of the things that I would love to see is a chance to have more drafts and being able to give more feedback on early drafts. Because we often see great improvement just after that first submission, and they get the marks back and they see the rubric. And some of those students have been really good about talking to me or talking to my marker if I've got a marker. But I think most of the time there hasn't been a lot of confusion with the instructions. A couple of people had trouble finding articles, and I'm happy to work with students to find articles if they're having that kind of trouble. But usually they don't have too much trouble with that. And I have used this assignment for upper year, I've used something similar for upper year students. So the modifications there, I require a peer edit step. So that's something where I'll actually give people a mark for peer editing somebody else's draft post. And a tip I got from another educator, Dr. Tamara Kelly, I actually tell them to come prepared to hand something in, or to be ready to submit. And then I get them, before they do that, they actually have to do the peer edit. So they actually get a few extra days. So it's not actually due the date that they think it is. It's a tiny bit deceptive, but I've never had anybody complain. And the quality of the work, again, is much, much better after they've had a peer look at it.
I have the same thing I've noticed is when students have a peer review, or if they get a second chance, they always put more effort into their work. But yes, this is great to get them to even share it with their friends and family, especially useful, especially now. Thank you so much, Tanya. If there's no other questions.
There's one quick question. I'll just say that so far my students where English is a second or extra language, they typically haven't been, it hasn't been that problematic in terms of them, you know, having issues with this, because it's a fairly simple assignment, and I do offer the chance to read over somebody's draft if they really want it. But this may vary depending on the school and your students. So I do, in my syllabus, I've got a link to the ESL Support Center on campus, and I think a lot of schools have that. So if you do, I would definitely encourage those students to check that out.
Great. Yes, and the other thing I wanted to also mention is the part about giving them examples. They sometimes have the writer's block. If I don't know where to begin or what is a good topic. So those are both great. Thank you. Thank you again, Tanya. I am now going to invite our next presenter, but before I do so, I will say if you have any more questions for Tanya, please make sure you put them in the chat, and we'll get together at the end of the this Dr. Rubin's presentation. Our next presenter is Dr. Rubin. Dr. Rubin is my co-chair with me on this committee, the CSM Committee for Microbiology Undergraduate Education. Dr. Rubin is at the University of Saskatchewan, and I will let him take it away.
Great. Thanks, Maria. And thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. The idea behind what I want to talk about is sort of the strategies that I've taken this year to sort of prepare for this newly distanced or online education, and just sort of talk about some of the experiences I've had very briefly, and then open things up to everyone for sort of I don't know, a roundtable type discussion, or a chance to just sort of share what we're all doing, because I've gotten so many fantastic ideas just from you know, kind of casual conversations, and I think we can all sort of benefit from that. So I guess what I wanted to say is this year, what I was really concerned with was student engagement. And so that was sort of the lens that I looked at this problem of distance learning through, and what I tried to address in all of the strategies that I've sort of tried to implement this year. And so there's three areas that I've really primarily focused on. One is just design, so what my lectures actually look like. And I have a great big huge caveat on this first one, which is that I was on sabbatical last year, and a huge part of my project was actually developing new teaching material. So I was able to sort of pivot those efforts from one class into the class that I'm teaching this fall. So this is something that took far more work than I would normally have the ability to do in this sort of summer period. Number two is production, and by that what I'm referring to is production of the lecture videos that I've put together for my students, and then some of the new approaches that I've taken and just little additions that I've made to my class that I hope will be helpful. So when thinking about design, this is just a couple of example slides that I had in my lectures previously. So I teach bacteriology and mycology to students in the second year of the veterinary curriculum at the U of S. And so everything has kind of this sort of not quite basic microbiology, but not clinical infectious disease. It's sort of somewhere in between. And the course is taught usually by genera. There's some instances where we go to higher taxonomic levels, but typically one lecture focuses on a particular genus. And so in this case, Staphylococcus, and you can see here describing Staph aureus as a cause of bovine mastitis and sort of what's encountered in the dairy industry history with that. So this is kind of what my lectures used to look like. And this year I did a massive update. So these are the same 2 slides in the new lecture format. One thing that's been really difficult for me as an instructor is that I don't have a textbook that really fits the needs of my course. And so my PowerPoints, or the PDFs of my PowerPoints, essentially serve as the textbook for my students. And so I have to sort of cram a lot more information on there than I would normally like to. And I sort of like to think of my lectures as having multiple chapters within them. And so I try and break those down into these different sort of subunits. So here you can see I'm talking about clinical significance, looking at cows, looking at the condition mastitis, the organism Staph aureus, and then here's the content. So this is sort of what I would imagine would be at the top of a page of a textbook if we had a textbook. And then these are sort of my chapters that we have for each organism that we're discussing. And so I think that the design has made a big difference this year. It just looks much better. It's easier to follow, and it makes for a nice package of material for my students. Now, looking at things more sort of practically and things that I think would be easier to implement, I was really interested in trying to improve the production quality of the lecture videos that I'm presenting. We're 100% asynchronous in our curriculum, and so everything is pre-recorded, and I know it's going to be really hard for our students to sit there and listen through their probably not great speakers on their computer to somebody sort of droning on through a not very good microphone. So there were a few things that I looked into. One was good quality sound. So this little microphone here is what I'm speaking to you through right now. I did a few test runs just comparing this with my built-in microphone on my laptop, and it is far, far, far better. It eliminates this sort of tinny ringiness that a normal computer microphone has. Reasonable lighting was something that I thought a lot about and haven't put as much emphasis on. Right now you can see I have really crappy lighting. I'm sort of backlit and you can't really see me very well. This isn't where I normally produce my videos from. I have a much better situation down on the first floor of my house. And then finally, video editing. I've found that a lot of the discussion that I've heard, at least in our college, in our university, is about sort of either going slide by slide and trying to record narrations for that, or using some really simple tools like Panopto to record the lecture. Some of the challenges that I think people encounter are if they sort of screw up and say something they don't mean to say, or they miss the point, or they explain something in kind of a roundabout way. And what I found the benefits of video editing is that I can just leave myself a little pause and then cut that part out of the video, and I don't have to restart the whole thing. One of the other advantages that I found to actually editing my content as opposed to just posting it as recorded is that because I'm posting my lectures in sort of 3 to 4 video chunks, it allows for a much more natural flow within those lectures. So I'm not sort of talking for 10 minutes, stopping, and then starting again. I'm doing the whole lecture as I normally would, and then I'm sort of chopping it up in post-production, if you want to use that phrase. So the flow is quite a bit better. There are a ton of resources out there, and I'll just thank Tanya for pointing me in the direction of this book, 99 Tips. It was a really good introductory resource as someone who hasn't done this type of content delivery in the past. I've also found huge amounts of just really great information on YouTube. And the places that I started looking were not really among other teachers or academics, but I actually looked to YouTubers. So famous YouTubers who make their living on this actually put out a lot of content out there focused on audience engagement, because engagement is how they make their money and how they attract subscribers. And I thought this was a maybe a different approach to sort of get towards student engagement as opposed to looking at things from kind of more of an educational perspective. So this video here is actually from kind of one of the most subscribed YouTubers, PewDiePie, who has a huge, I think over 100 million followers. So clearly he's doing something right when it comes to audience engagement, had some really good tips. And then there's also some great information about sort of your own home studio setup and really simple, inexpensive, and achievable ways of doing that. This is kind of what production looks like in my instance. So this is just a screenshot from iMovie, which is what I use. So these are all of my little lectures that I've been working on. Each is a separate project. This is what it looks like within the lecture. So when I'm actually splicing clips together, putting in audio, I always have a little musical intro that starts it off to sort of, just lighten the mood a little bit. You can add captions, you can add photos, you can do all sorts of really cool things in a really easy way. The other thing that I've done, and I'm not sure if it's actually legal or not, but because everything is behind sort of the university's password in the learning management system, is I actually am using this piece of software called iTube Go to download YouTube videos that I normally show in class. And why this has been really useful for me is it allows me to sort of present the normal content that I do from YouTube really seamlessly. So I can just simply download those videos and then splice them into my lectures as I'm editing them without sort of awkward, trying to share multiple screens, trying to deal with poor sound quality, or simply giving students a list of links that they have to then click on within the lecture or try and remember what I was talking about and go back to them afterwards. So that I think has also worked quite well. And then finally, a couple of new approaches that I'm taking this year. I'm having my students do a Wikipedia writing or editing assignment. Wikiedu has some really great resources. These are just some screenshots of the dashboard. So this is my course here, veterinary bacteriology and mycology. And it's great because it gives you the chance to, or it gives you the ability to watch what each of your students are doing, see the edits they're making on the pages. You can assign them articles that they need to work on and then sort of follow what all of them are doing individually. They have a really nice sort of form template that you can use for your class where there's different modules that the students need to complete about how to do things on Wikipedia. And then you can select articles for the students to sign up for. So in a veterinary context, there's a lot of bacteria where there isn't really much available on Wikipedia, surprisingly. And so there's some really great gaps for them to be filling. And then finally, something that I've just added to my lectures, because I don't have sort of the normal feedback of the deer in headlights look when I say a word they don't understand. I've added this sort of new terms bibliography, I guess, to the end of my lectures. And then instead of sort of accepting questions from them at the end of my lectures, what I've done is put in questions for self-reflection that sort of get at some of the concepts of the lecture that they can then think about. And thank you, Don Yoon, who I know is on the call today, for putting together this agar art for me. It's really helped with the design of my course. And with that, I'd be certainly happy to take any questions and also to just hear what everybody else is doing and start the discussion.
Thank you, Joe. For the community discussion, we won't be recording so that you can feel free to have a interactive discussion with us. If there's any questions for Joe right now, if you can put it in the chat or raise your blue hand. While we wait, I do have a question about iMovie.
Yes.
Are there any tips that you can give people? Because I have been struggling with that program for the last few days, and it's just been painful. Was there a big learning curve for you, or? Not
really. So I hadn't used iMovie for probably about 10 years. I used to make some of my own YouTube content back in another life, which I will never refer anybody to. And so I had a little bit of familiarity with the previous iteration of the software. I found it was relatively simple. It's kind of drag and drop. It was a little bit confusing to me how the content was organized. So when you'd finish a video, that was kind of its own project, and that the information within that video isn't really available easily to other projects. So there is a lot of copying and pasting that I end up doing sort of within one lecture. So I always start the parts 2 and 3 of the same lecture with kind of the opening slide, so they know this is Staphylococcus or whatever. So I pull that all over from the other videos, but I don't have a great advice. I'd certainly be happy to go over that and even do a Zoom tutorial if anybody's interested. That could be really fun.
Great, thank you. We do have a question. How do you deal with copyright issues related to courses you create?
Great question. I have to admit, so generally speaking, the guidance that we have been given is that anything that is freely available on the internet, so not behind a paywall, can be provided to the students as long as it's behind a university password protected wall. So as long as only the students can get it as part of their course, it's not a big problem. With the downloading of the YouTube videos, which I'm not sure if that's okay to do or not, I haven't asked. I'm sort of taking the approach that this is what I'm trying to do to make my lectures as good as possible. And I certainly provide them the links. Those are all available in the PDFs, but I haven't actually asked. So I'm sort of assuming that it's available freely online. And so it sort of falls into that category of things we've done in the past. And copyrights to my creations. So the University of Saskatchewan actually, within our collective agreement, anything that faculty create as part of their teaching materials is our own copyright. So all the little cartoons and sort of cutesy stuff that I've thrown into my lectures, all of that design is my own personal copyright. I had actually thought about putting my lectures as well on YouTube, although because of the copyrighted material that I use, I think that would be a challenge. But I haven't really come across any issues with distributing my own stuff in that way.
Thank you again, Joe. I'm going to now stop the recording and we can continue our community check-in.